Welcome to week 2 of Spencerian structures. In this lesson, I would like to go over all the capital letters, again in monoline. Now, capital letters present us with a great latitude for our indulgence for variety, and we do so by changing proportions, how the letters terminate, how they combine, shadings, and flourishes. When we make these alterations, we have to take care to maintain the characteristic of the letter itself. So in order to do so, we have to study the fundamental backbone of these letters. While I understand we're all very eager to get into more complicated and flourished capitals, bear with me here while we go over the very basics. If we understand these basic principles and can execute them flawlessly, executing the more flourished capitals would not be something difficult at all. So to begin, I would like to talk about capital stems and the ending ovals. Capital stems forms 13 of the capital letters. So the proper execution of the capital stems is very important. While there are a variety of ways to execute them, the main structure is the same, and that is the compound curve. So these three all share, and I ask that when you practice these, use a very flexible nib, like the Leonard principle, so that you can train your light touch by just doing a hairline in all of your practices. Then when you come back and do the letters and write words, it will be very easy for you to execute light, delicate letters. In the first two stems here, the common factor is the horizontal oval. One is at the bottom and one is at the top. But when you bisect these ovals, the line that you bisected it with are both parallel to your baseline. Here we have what we call an inclined oval. I'm not a particularly big fan of the inclined oval, but it isn't inaccurate. I prefer when things completely balance out, such as if we write a letter B, I prefer these two ovals being the same size, both horizontal. For me, it's a better balance of the letter. If you do something inclined, it is not wrong, it's just preference, a matter of preference. When we execute the capital stem compound curve, think to yourself that this is your left curve, this is your right curve. So left curve, right curve. That's the compound stem. For many of you who have already started shading your letters before this course, it will be very tempting to start adding pressure, and I urge you to not do so. In the second row here, I wanted to show you what happens when you continue the potential ovals that are in the basic capital stems. So the first one, for example, we have our regular capital stem. Now this is a potential oval. If we continue this oval, here's what we achieve. If we combine this with this, we get this. And here, we again have a continuation of the potential ovals, just in a different direction. But notice the common factor of all of these. These two curves are parallel. The space between them are equal. The space between here is equal. And you can see this connection to this connection, they're concentric ovals. Here, again, more parallel curves with the same distance apart. So if this was done poorly, it may look something like so. And you can see the lack of the parallel curves disturbs the consistency and gracefulness of this execution. Here we have again a left curve with a right curve. I know for many of you who have been practicing Spencerian that this might seem very elementary, but I want you to understand from practicing this the very fundamental principles of how this was built up. So that next time when you do, say, like a letter N, that you will not have a shape like so. Now this is wrong partly because of inaccurate shading, but also if you understand that it's built up of a left curve and a right curve of the oval, you will realize that this negative shape that this shade forms is inaccurate. So this is the reason why I want you to see, without the shades, the basic structure of what you are writing. So once you understand that this is a left curve and a right curve combination, you can extend the potential ovals inside here infinitely. So before we start to reach the final right curve, we can continue the oval our left curve is producing by being a left curve here. So we can continue that. Like so. And notice, again, the area between here and here is the same. The distance between the curves are the same. Here are some what is considered more fancy capital beginnings. I'm a big fan of that term because I feel like that discourages people from practicing those. And in reality, they are very, very simple. It is nothing different from what we have been talking about. So we begin with a horizontal oval. This would be the beginning of a left curve. Finish the oval. Cross at approximately 90 degrees. So here we have again a left curve and then a right curve. So what this forms is what I've shown here, that this is a potential oval. This oval is horizontal. This oval is on your slant. Now, taking this one step further, we have horizontal oval. And before we continue into this potential oval, we're taking the left curve of this and executing a smaller version of the potential oval. That is all that it is. And then, parallel to the curve we just created, left curve and right curve. All these crossings here are approximately 90 degrees. When you practice this, I encourage you to practice this big so you can actually see, much bigger than it is now. I just need to fit it on the screen. But so you can see that where the crossings are, it's 90 degrees. Here we have two other extensions of what we just did. So here you see it's a compound curve. It is the bottom of a right curve and the top of a left curve. So we begin with a compound curve. You can begin this below the baseline or above the baseline. That's completely optional. And then we finish this oval. Come up. And this is your left curve and this is your right curve. Now the most common mistake that we make when we execute this is have this part, the bottom portion, too flat. So it's very, very easy to get something like this. Now, if you just look at this at a glance, you might think there's nothing wrong with it. But if you turn it around, you can see that this is not as oval as it could be. So take care when you're executing these two. If you feel comfortable with the first capital stems and these, practice these two over and over again until you can get the perfect oval shape when you turn your paper sideways. You can see that is 1/2 of a left curve, 1/2 of a right curve. Here you can see again an extension of the capital stems we just practiced. Here is the original capital stem. If you just extended and completed the right side of this oval, you can get this shape, which starts on the bottom, curls in, right curve out. From our basic capital loop, we can extend this portion and have something that starts below the baseline, such as in this N. And here is an application of what we just described. Before we had just beginning as a compound curve without this portion, and now we extend the compound curve to finish the potential oval, and we get a more elaborate beginning. So the point I'm trying to make is that when you start to realize where the right curve, the left curves are, what you are actually constructing, then it will be very easy for you to execute another variation. It wouldn't be something you have to learn. So see here, from this to this, we're adding this oval loop here. And this oval loop is what? It's merely an extension of this curve into a smaller potential oval and then exiting out into a right curve, which we can see in this application in the letter W. The ending ovals are very important to your letters as well. It's a tendency when we do the bottom ovals to make them more round than it is oval. So it's very common to do this. Left curve, right curve. Okay, this makes your letter look very elementary. So when you practice in monoline, take care to have these shapes be exactly an elliptical oval. So again, what I mean by that is 2 times the width, 3 times the height. And a very good way to check your work is to turn your work to the side and see if it looks like an elliptical oval to you. If you compare the first one, this one is clearly not. You do not want any doubt, what it is. Is it a circle or an oval? You want it to be very clear all the time that it is an oval. Now, when you have endings curling in like this, like the letter C or the letter D, make sure that whatever you are curling in is part of an extension of an oval. So you do not want to curl in carelessly. Like that. We're not sure where this is going. Okay, we always want to suggest an oval. In the letter D, like the letter A, it is very, very crucial that if you started with a horizontal oval, especially to end on a horizontal oval, it's very easy to end up with something like that. Right, so that is an oval, but it's not horizontal. So you can see the imbalance here. In a letter like S, when you have parallel curves, take care to make sure that your exit oval is parallel. The spacing between all of this is similar. In letters like N, M, where it's common to have an ending flourish like this, make sure that when you do this, that you're thinking about where your baseline is, so that your main stroke, your left curve here, extends below the baseline to execute this oval. Take care to make sure again that this oval is horizontal so that it's parallel with your baseline. This exit stroke has to end in a way that suggests a continuous oval. That is what makes a graceful letter. If, say, you ended it like so, if you ended the letter like so, you now have suggested a very ugly straight line that is not going anywhere circular. You're interrupting the flow of the letter that is completely composed of curves. The capitals, like the lower cases, are made up of principles, including the ones we talked about in the last lesson. The additional ones are listed in the handout here. The fifth principle is the capital O. The capital O is made on the regular slant, composed entirely of left and right curves. Take care when you execute this that no area of this letter appears angular. The width of your letter O should be half the size of your slanting height. The full left curve that you begin the letter with the left curve that you end the letter on, should be parallel. The distance between the first left curve and the last left curve, when we measure it at the middle of the letter, should be 1/5 of the width of the letter itself. A good way to practice the capital O is the oval exercise, so that you gain a steady motion of the pen when you execute the letter. The sixth principle is called the contracted capital O. So beginning at the top, a left curve extends to the baseline, joined by a right curve up half a space, ending with a left curve that is parallel to your beginning left curve. The distance between the first left curve and the second left curve, compared to the whole width of the letter, should be approximately 1/4 of the width. The seventh principle is the capital loop. It begins one space above the baseline with a left curve, right curve 2 spaces down, left curve back up again parallel to your first left curve, and end with a right curve. This terminating curve is very often combined with other principles, but it's very crucial for us to know that this right curve here is not a straight line. Many people execute it as a straight line, but if we learn the principles, we would know that it clearly tells us it's a right curve. The distance between the first and the second left curve and the first and second right curve are the same, and this distance should be equal to half the width of the loop. The capital stem is the eighth principle. It begins with a left curve that ends in the middle, right curve, and an oval half the height of the letter. Take care that the left curve and the right curve bends equally. What this means is if we finish the ovals that the left and right curves are a part of, these ovals should be just like in the lowercase letters where we had groups of letters based on their similarities. We have 9 groups in the capital letters. The first group is the letters O, E, and D. They all include the full O, so the fifth principle. Now, when we go over this, some of you may be thinking that these are very simple forms, or they're not the more popular forms of the Spencerian that we see today. This is the way that Spencer presented these letters, and I think it's crucial to understand where the letters came from first before we start elaborating. The letter E begins with a left curve here, 1/4 the length of the letter. So if we divide the letter into 4 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is the size of the beginning loop. The right curve crosses it at near the top of the letter, and then continue with a left curve 1/3 the length of the letter, so it reaches the first line here. Have the small loop curling in, curling out, joined to a left curve that is 2/3 the length of the letter, and then we finish with principle 5 with your capital O, so that these two left curves are parallel. It's very easy to execute something like this for the letter E, or the other way around where this comes too far to the right and it looks very imbalanced like this. A good way to practice the letter E is to first, when you warm up with your oval drills, to practice your letter E within your oval drill so that you can see that this O is parallel to your ovals. This is parallel with your ovals as well. You will never get an imbalanced letter E by practicing like this. Now, when you understand the structure of this, when we apply it to the letter E that we see in a lot of ornamental penmanship writing, we begin with a horizontal or inclined oval of your choice. We come up an extension of the right curve. If we crop out this beginning oval, we have the structure that we see clearly in Spencer's E. The way you end this can take a million forms once you understand that the original structure is the capital O. You can end it with an inclined oval like so, but always make sure that it is an oval. Then you can end with a horizontal oval like so. But take care that these two left curves are parallel, just like in the accurate execution of the fifth principle. Many people have a love-hate relationship with the letter D, and I hope this explanation will help you when you practice this letter. It begins 2 spaces above the ruled line with a compound curve. So when I say compound curve, think left curve, right curve, with a short turn at the base where we form the loop. Now, a very good idea of when you should start pushing your hairline up is think of a figure 8. So after the compound curve, think of this as an equal figure 8. Okay? So when we come down and have this little loop, extend as much as you just did to form the loop. That is a good indication of when you should start turning up. This also helps you keep the proportions of your D accurate by making sure that the front of the letter is smaller than it is in the back. So when we finish the figure 8, come up with the right curve, crossing on the ruled line here, and we join the first curve of the principle 5. So we come up and we think capital letter O extends 2.5 space of the ruled line. So if we look at this letter, the majority of the weight is, if this was the line, if this was the center line, the majority of the weight is in the back. The bowl of this letter should be 1/6 of the distance if we think about the distance in this direction. It is very, very easy to end up with a D with a really, really large bowl. I don't think this example does it enough justice. You can still see more weight on the back, but when we have a bowl that is really big and an ending that is really tiny, that's the common mistake in the letter D. So here's a good way to practice the letter D. If we fit it within 6 equal spaces. Okay, so this would be on your slant, and you would just bisect it and have 6 equal spaces. So you can see clearly where the weight of the letter holds. In the second group of letters is C and H. They both have a similar upper loop and an contracted O. So the C begins with a right curve that comes up 3 spaces. A lot of people just do a straight line like this. It is not a straight line, it's a right curve. And then we have a contracted O, our principle 6. It crosses your first beginning right curve 2 spaces from the top. So I hope you can see it does you well if you practice the principles on its own and then come back to the letters and apply your principles to your letters instead of studying every letter as you see it. So this is the Spencer C, which we see a lot of applications when we see variations like so. This would be your principle 6. Another variation of the capital C is this one. I wanted to demonstrate here what you need to consider when you're writing a word. Now, even though this C is the same, you want to have your ending oval bisect the baseline so that when you fit your lowercase here, you are not writing on top of your capital letter. You're leaving enough space for your lowercase. Many people have trouble ending this with a perfect oval, and that just comes with time and practice. So the accurate letter C is when this oval is horizontal, this is horizontal, and the sizes of these are similar. And the biggest mistake that one can make is writing something that ends up like this shape. So when you continue the potential curves, it finishes in an egg shape, not an oval. After you write the letter C, it's helpful for you to draw in the extension of the oval you just created and see if the shape is an elliptical oval. The letter H begins one space above the ruled line. We go up with a left curve, continue down with a right curve that is half the height of the letter, form the loop with the left curve, right curve down to the baseline. This is very important because a lot of people's H's here is straight. It should not be straight. It is part of an oval. It is the right curve of an oval. Down to the baseline, compound curve up. So left curve, right curve. The H is really the perfect letter for you to understand compound curves and how the ovals work in a relationship to each other. When you create the compound curve here, you are also creating, remember I said, this is the left curve, this is the right curve. You are also creating the potential ovals, not in exactly the oval shape, but in oval loops of the shapes that you're creating because of your compound curve. After you finish the compound curve, you have your principal 6 again, contracted capital O. The letter H is a perfect opportunity for you to practice balance. The two loops have to be the same size. The distance between this capital loop here is the same on this side and this side. This is an exaggerated version of the letter H. I wanted to show you this so you have this image in your head. The loops should not be as big, this space as tight, but the idea is these are equal and balanced parts. Here are some other versions of the letter H. Here we begin with a capital stem. And remember that this is a compound curve, not a straight line with a tail, okay? This is a compound curve. This line is taller than your horizontal oval. It begins partly with a left curve, then straight line parallel to your capital stem. This loop begins on the bottom and finishes up horizontal right curve, and none of this loop ever touches the capital stem. This version of the capital H is just a simple extension of Spencer's H. Instead of a capital loop beginning the letter, we have a horizontal oval. And instead of a vertical oval, the principal 6, we end with a horizontal oval that balances this. So in this letter, ideally this loop should be the same size as this. This should be the same size as this. Now, there are instances where we change the proportions and make, for example, this side larger than this. You can do that, but you want it to be apparent. It can't be, oh, it looks, maybe it could be the same size. You want it to be obvious. If you wanted to do that, you wanted to make sure that people know you did that on purpose. It's not a mistake that you didn't make it balanced. Third group of letters, X, Z, Q, W, all begin with a capital loop and a line curved to the left as its termination. The capital Z begins with principal 7, which is the capital loop. So this is exactly what we talked about in the principle. Keep the same spacing, parallel curves, and we finish on the right side with your principal 6. The principal 6, remember that it meets at half the letter height. A good way to practice your capital loops is to add this to your warm-up practices. So it's the oval drill with your loop. And take care to make sure that both inverted and upright, the distance between the curves are parallel. Now an extension of the letter X, from here, you can see we simplify the capital loop with just one oval. And here we finish with the principal 6. Instead of vertical, we can make it a horizontal oval. Be very careful of balance when you do such things. You don't want to end up with letters that look like this. It's clearly weighted too much to the right or too much to the left. You want each side, whatever beginning you choose, to be similar in weight. The letter Z, in my opinion, is really the prettiest letter of the alphabet. It really gives you that fluidity. The Spencer's version begins with your principal 7, your capital loop, left curve, half a space, crossing your principal 7, an extended inverted loop, just like your lowercase z or your principal 4. So adapting these principles, instead of the capital loop, we're simplifying it down to one oval, and it's the same thing. Come here down, left curve, half a space, cross your principal 7, an extended loop, and instead of exiting out of the letter, we're taking advantage of the left curve, continuing the left curve into its oval, and finishing it into the letter. And notice when we do such things that this is always forming an oval shape. The letter Q begins with the principal 7. Extending the right curve, we go into a loop, and we have a compound curve that rises one space to the right of the main portion of the letter. So between here and here is one space. So make sure when you practice the letter Q that you have, just like the letter L, a horizontal compound curve. Make sure that you can clearly see that this could be the left curve, this could be the right curve. An adaptation of this Q would be the simplified capital loop, compound curve, end with a horizontal oval. Just like the previous examples, you want to think about your baseline and where you are going to put your lower cases so that your horizontal oval goes down low enough to encase your lowercase instead of your lowercase cutting through all of your letters. The capital letter W begins with the principal 7, a full right curve, and a right curve up again, 3 spaces. A lot of people make the mistake of ending this earlier, and that is not the pure Spencerian W. You always have kind of this relationship going on with the letter W. After the right curve, a slight left curve, about 60 degrees from the baseline, and a left curve up again, curling into a dot at 2 spaces up from the baseline. The distance between the right curve, the 2 right curves, the distance between the right curve and the left curve should be the same. You can also substitute the beginning of the letter with a horizontal oval and the capital stem. Think of this portion when you execute it, because when you're writing, when you're doing the rhythmic movement, you want it to be continuous. Think that it is similar to the ending T, right curve, straight line, right curve. It's a similar movement. So do take care that the distance is the same, but don't be too intimidated to have the same rhythmic movement as you continue the capital letter W. The fourth group of capitals is V, U, and Y. All of the capital loops end, instead of the right curve, end with a curve to the right. The letter V begins with the principal 7, and the turn at the base, it's supposed to be here, but we modify it to turn to the right. A compound curve 2 spaces up. Take care what that means, part of the right curve, part of the left curve. And a dot ending on 2 spaces above the baseline, like the letter W. Think of this compound curve as the wall. Think of this as a wall. Okay, letters like V are not inherently very balanced without this reach. So do not be afraid to reach this compound curve out a little farther than you think, so that this whole letter doesn't tip over because it reaches that wall. So if you did not curl in as far out, say if you ended it here, right here, this letter would not be as balanced. It looks like it could topple over. But if you reach it out a little farther, it gives it that stability. And like the letters in the previous group, you can also absolutely substitute this with just one left curve and down, or you can substitute it with a horizontal oval connecting to this. That is completely based on your preference and how you would like to write, but the core is the same, that this is a compound curve stem. That never ever changes. Even if you ended this with an oval coming up to here, like so, and fitted your lowercase here, this is still your compound curve. The letter U has the same modified principle 7, a right curve, 2/3 of the height of the letter. And this line retraces half the length of the letter U, and we curl up the right curve one space. So take care that when you do this letter, these two curves are similar. These right curves are similar. What that means is if I cover the top of the letter, you should see two exact right curves. It should not look something like this. You can certainly again substitute the principle 7 with an oval loop and a horizontal oval instead of the right curve up. When you do this, take care of balance, just like in the previous examples. You want your horizontal oval to bisect the baseline, but you don't want something like this. The letter Y begins with a modified principle 7 that goes down 3/4 of the length of the letter. A right curve up 2/3 of the letter, the top of the second line, and we end with a capital stem, principle 8, to the baseline. So this is a compound curve. You should be able to identify your letter, the left curve, the right curve. And we end the capital stem with the dot. This dot is at 1/6 of the height from the baseline. So this is about 1/6 of this x height. So the pure Spencer's Y, if you had a line through the last stroke of the capital loop on slant, this line should touch the right side of your dot. That is the proportion of where this letter ends. The letter Y and the letter U should be the same width. Other adaptations of the Y, you can substitute the principle 7 for an oval loop, and instead of ending it in a dot, you could continue your capital stem into whatever potential oval you see fit. There are, as I mentioned, many, many, many variations of each letter. My goal is not for me to present every single variation for you and for you to learn them by memory. The goal is for you to see and create your own variations, for you to see what Spencer's Y was, what he meant by this is the capital stem. So no matter what you change, the principle 7, you will always know that this is a capital stem, so this is a compound curve. The proportion is that this is on the same line, so you can extend your capital stem to wherever and turn wherever, as long as it continues the curvature, so it's naturally graceful. This way, if you understand it, you not only can create your own variations, you can flourish at your own will. You can continue this as dramatic as you want it to. You can continue it all the way over. You can do whatever because you understand this curvature. You can make it encircle the Y, like so. You can create variations that aren't found because you understand the curvatures of where it's going. I will provide some exemplars of different variations for you to study, but what I want you to keep in mind when you practice is these core fundamental strokes, the principles. The right curves, the left curves, the principles 1 through 8 is what makes up your letter. The fifth group of the letters are A, N, and M. They're very similar in the capital stem formation and the overall shape. The letter A begins with your capital stem, so think compound curve, left curve, right curve, horizontal oval, half the height of the letter. Then we meet at the top of the capital stem with a slight left curve and a short left curve 1 space above the baseline and with a right curve out. Now, in execution of this, it's perfectly fine to end like so. The other common A is the same as your lowercase a. The left curve, right curve. So this is a semi-angular shape with a horizontal oval. Again, bisecting the baseline. Make sure that it's clearly an oval, not a potential circle, and it's balanced with the size of your letter. So if this was this big, it would not look as graceful when we're just presenting the letter itself. For the letter N, this version, it's the capital stem, downward left curve like the letter A. Many people have trouble with the letters M and N, the capital letters. It just doesn't look right. And the reason is because we don't understand that this stroke is not straight. It's a left curve, like the letter A, slight left curve. This again is a left curve, 2 spaces up, dot just like the V and the W. Think of your wall, okay, and how much this letter needs this extension to make it stay upright. The space between the capital stem and the left curve to the left curve, second left curve, should be the same. The other option for the letter N is your principal 7 with the lower half of it straight. So up to here, it is still a right curve. Now you can most certainly adapt it to a capital stem, but in Spencer's N, this is the way it was taught. The left curve retraces 1 space above the ruled line, separates, straight line, right curve up 1 space. Notice that whatever variation you choose to do, whatever flourish you choose to do here, the curves have to be parallel. The letter M is just like the letter N. So the capital stem with a left curve, not a straight line, it's very slight. So if you finish this oval, it would be very skinny. And then another left curve that is parallel to your capital stem. And we end with a contracted capital O. So the principal 6. Another variation of the M is the capital loop, retrace half a space of the letter, half the height of the letter, left curve, straight line, left curve up again, straight line, right curve up 1 space. Notice the relationship of the humps of the M, that they should be on a slant. This makes the letter look more graceful than if it was all the same height. The 6th group is the letters T and F. They are basically capital stems with a cap and in the F a dash and a dot. So like the first handout where we had all the variations of the capital stems, you can apply whichever variation of your choice. So it's a horizontal oval, capital stem, This is the variation I chose here. You can certainly extend it to make it more elaborate, but think about parallel curves, equal spacing, and end with a compound curve crossbar. Make sure when you cross that whatever you cross this compound curve into, the crossing is approximately 90 degrees. You want to make sure that this is a compound curve. This cannot be any sort of could be straight line. You have to clearly see the ovals that your compound curve is creating. Do not have the crossbar to be sort of crossing or touching it. Either cross it all the way or leave it with an ample space so people know you didn't cross it. The F is just the letter T. Again, you can do whatever with the capital stem extended, into its potential ovals with a central crossbar and an optional dash. You can finish it with just a crossbar. The seventh group is the letters I and J. This is the traditional Spencer's I, and I really like this I. It's not seen as often anymore, and it often comes across as, oh, this is a flourished letter, but this is how the Spencerian I was first taught. So it begins one space above the baseline with a left curve, rise one space, right curve, descend one space, left curve that divides this oval into two parts. Left curve up, and then finish with the capital stem. This version of the I can be a little challenging to do, but if you know which part of the oval you're executing, it becomes very easy. It starts from here, starts from the baseline or below. It's a left curve up. So again, if we practice our principles faithfully, there will be no problem executing this left curve alone. It's very, very common to have something that is too straight because we do not have a natural tendency to draw this oval in this direction. Left curve, so you're forming, this is the oval you're forming. A right curve, this is the oval you're forming. Come halfway, half the height of the letter, and change the direction of the oval. End it parallel to this curve, parallel to this right curve, and another right curve down here. The letter J is just the letter I. Instead of a capital stem, we have an extended loop. Translating it to this version, we have again part of the left curve of this oval, and then finish with an extended loop. So now you can see, if you understand this principle, it's very easy for you to flourish this J. Say if we began with a horizontal oval, left curve up, extended loop, because we know this is part of the left curve, so we can finish the left curve. Finish the left curve oval. It's just a continuation of the curvatures that we're practicing. In the eighth group, we have the letters S, L, G, and K. They all have the common characteristics of the upper line and the compound curves. So the letter S begins with a right curve, 3 spaces up. So you can see the potential oval it's creating. And then we just finish it with a capital stem. That's how easy the letter is. The capital stem crosses the right curve that we began with midway of the letter. We can certainly play with this right curve that it came with. We can change that into a horizontal oval and then the capital stem. And we can extend that capital stem into another ending oval, but make sure that this capital stem is crossing midway. We do not want to see crosses that are careless, like this. You don't want these ovals to be sort of maybe touching. You want it to be clear, either cross or not touch, like that. The letter L begins with a horizontal loop, just like the letter S, a compound curve, capital stem. We have the oval loop, just like the letter Q, and a horizontal compound curve. And we can extend that compound curve where we have the right side of the oval extended to the left. The ideal L will have two horizontal ovals that are similar in size. The letter G begins with a right curve 3 spaces up like the letter S, a left curve 2/3 of the way down, right curve up half a space. So this gives you an accurate understanding of the proportion of this letter. 2/3 of the letter, half a space of your X height. And then we finish with a capital stem. If we study the letter from this right curve, more than half of the weight is on the right side. Just like in the S where we carried over the part of this right curve, we can do so here in the letter G. Instead of this right curve beginning all the way here, we're taking this portion and finishing the curvature here. So we begin with a horizontal oval and keeping the same proportions. Left curve 2/3 of the way, right curve up half the space of the X height, and a capital stem. And you can certainly extend your capital stem to have a parallel curvature.
The capital K begins with a horizontal oval and then the capital stem. Reaching over higher than the horizontal oval, we have a compound curve down.
Turn it into a loop and end with a horizontal oval, bisecting the baseline. So these two ovals would be similar in size. The last group of the letters are P, B, and R. These share very similar characteristics. If you learn one correctly, you can learn the other ones. This version of the letter P begins with your horizontal oval capital stem and an oval that takes up 2 spaces of your X height. Make sure these crossings are 90 degrees. You can certainly extend this left curve up like so, or even further, like so. And you can extend your capital stem This variation of P can begin with a horizontal or inclined oval. When you begin with an inclined oval, make sure that there isn't too much space between here. You want to leave ample space, but you don't want it to be huge. You don't want to see a huge gap. So if you want it horizontal, make sure it looks horizontal. If you want it inclined, make sure that it looks inclined. Come down from your oval in a shape of a vase. You want to leave equal parts on both sides. This is extremely important before we go into shading, because the tendency when we shade this is to shade this all the way so this side is too fat, then you don't see your hairline on here anymore. So make sure when you practice monoline, you're leaving ample amount of space to prepare for that. When you come up of the left curve, finish with the right curve, and there's your P. This is the traditional version, the capital stem extending into a full left curve and finishing with a right curve, ending the P. So you can certainly elaborate by not making a full left curve, but curving in again to finish the potential curvatures and end like so. The letter B, like the letter P, begins with the capital stem. You can do a full left curve, right curve down, loop, and an oval. So think of a capital O. Make sure you're watching the proportions that the bowls of your B form versus the back of the B. The weight should be mostly in the back. This version of the B begins with a capital stem and a lowercase z. Make sure when you are doing this portion of your lowercase z that it's on slant, that your z is on slant. And very common mistake to make when you do this is to have this letter Z, this part be very tiny, and the exit be very big. The distance between here and here should be equal. So you should have a parallel curve like so. Distance between here and here are the same. And think about when you curl in that the oval this forms is the similar size to this horizontal oval that you began with. In this version of the letter B, it's just like the P, where you have a horizontal or inclined oval, your vase shape. Make sure you're leaving enough space. Finish with the letter Z and keep the equal distance. And think about how big your oval is up top and on the bottom. The letter R is the capital B with the ending of a capital K. So your capital stem, the beginning of your letter Z, and the ending of your letter K. In this version of the R, you have an inclined or horizontal oval. Be careful of the spacing between these two strokes. Beginning of your letter Z, ending of your letter K. Make sure it's very clear that these ovals that you end with are not circular. So for homework this week, I would like you to practice all of the capital letters in its monoline form. And for the letters that have variations, I'm positive there are other variations that I have not included in the handouts. I hope I showed you through this lesson that if you understand the structure, you can do anything with these letters. So before we begin shading, I want to prepare your grip so that you have a light touch. Use a very flexible nib like the Leonard so that everything is written with a hairline. So letters like these, you're used to making these downstrokes and turns in all hairlines, so that when we add the shade, you will find it much easier to do than if you practiced with a G-nib. Remember that it's always more important for us to think about what we're practicing rather than just writing a lot of letters. When you write each single letter, do not waste your time by just merely executing. Think about your left curves, right curves, the principles. It will do you very, very well if you practice the principles separately. Practice them well, even if they seem very mundane and you think you can definitely execute a compound curve. See, if you have the capital stem down, you should have 13 of your capital letters in good shape. So the reason people don't have consistent capital letters is because we neglected the principles that made them. So take care to practice the principles first, then move on to your letters, thinking in each stroke about what it is that you are doing. You are doing a horizontal oval. You are executing the right part of an oval. You are executing the left part of an oval. If you continuing practice thinking like this, there will be no problem for you to elaborate your capitals, to flourish them, because you will see exactly what it is that you're doing. You're not just writing a letter, you are illustrating a combination of curvatures that makes up a letter. So feel free again to post your practice work. It's been very helpful for me to see what you're practicing, how you're practicing, and for me to point out little things, even like I would suggest you not use the G-nibs, or don't write on, pad paper, write on a separate sheet, single sheet of paper, so you have whole arm movements. And make sure to keep doing your warm-ups. And I want you to keep in mind that the goal for this week is for you to be able to execute correct letter forms in ink with a flexible nib in all hairlines. This way, in our next lesson, when we start talking about shading, in next week when we start talking about shading, your shading will not interfere with accurate letter forms. You want it to complement it, not distort it. So I hope you guys enjoy your practice and let me know if you have any questions along the way.